Welcome to this edition of AFMC.
I'll tell you how I got better. I'm
Glad to be here.
But a mission to
Delivery of. Well, I think that we're going to talk about everybody's.
Arkansas is the second highest prescriber.
Welcome to this episode of AFMC TV. I'm Robin Ledbetter. Thank you for joining us. Today I have with me Dr. Chad Rodgers. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk a little bit about playtime today.
I know, my favorite subject.
But it's important.
Yeah, very important.
Especially after the trauma of the pandemic and kids seeing learning loss and preparing kids to be productive members of society. How does that play into that?
Yeah, no pun intended. Yeah, so it's so important. You know, people do think that play is sort of frivolous and, you know, something that's kind of maybe a luxury or something that you do in your leisure, but play is so crucial to children. And I think that during the pandemic, you know, we saw a lot of the kind of normal social supports that kids have. School, also daycare, after school services, going to play soccer, going to other events that are not school related. And there was just that whole activity, that kind of structured or play was sort of gone. But people did do a lot of stuff at home. But we all also got very electronic heavy, right? I did at least in my household because we were in home a lot and you had to pass the time. But we did see, you know, significant impacts on children, especially very young children. I think the estimate is about 18 months of loss of learning and education. And that when kids re-entered into the traditional school setting or the traditional learning setting, these kids were very far behind at least a year. So there was a lot of catch up. So it also speaks a lot to how important that interaction, that face-to-face, being in school. Virtual is a great option, and for a lot of families it works well, but how important that is because that play is a part of that. You know, we don't always recognize how that kind of, because the definition of play is kind of broad, but how important it is to not only our kids, but to our older kids and our teens and also to us.
You touched on this a little bit. There's a difference between social and instructional too,
right,
that parents should pay attention to.
Right. Yeah. So definitely, you know, I think people get very geared towards they got to have a schedule and they got to do the flashcards and they you know they got to get the blocks and you know it's like their drill sergeant kind of making the kid do all these kind of things, and that kind of play is important and that can be play, but also sort of that loose play, you know, where there's so much that the kids are developing as far as their motor skills, but also their socialization, but also their social emotional skills. So there's a lot of important interactions that happen with adults during play that help the kids as they're developing into healthy adults.
And what do you tell parents that don't really know how to orchestrate that?
Yeah.
What are some things they should be intentional with doing?
Yeah, you know, so every visit at a Watch Out visit, we kind of spend some time talking to parents about what they should be doing. And some parents are over there with a note card and they're like, and you know, and it's the stress of work, or the parents are going to school, or they're also trying to make dinner, which to me is the hardest part of the day, and do all those things, but also have some time for themselves and for their spouse. So it feels like, this is another thing I have to do. But really, play should feel like play. And so there is a lot of importance in sort of having some structured play, some structured time. So where you're kind of wanting to work with your kids on their numbers and on their letters and on their colors, because those are all things that set them up for success in school. But there's also a lot to be said in just rolling around the floor or just playing a board game together as a family, or going outside and playing ball. You know, so those are all great skills that we had. So, but it should also be for the adults. And we stress how important that is for kids, but it's important for us. I mean, it gets us outside, it gets us more physically active, it gets us more kind of clears out those cognitive cobwebs that with a day. So it could be a really healthy activity for the whole family. So it shouldn't feel like, or if I don't do this, my kid is not going to get into college. You know, play is play, and that's what it should feel like.
And guided play is also a part of that too.
Yeah. So, you know, you think about, a lot of times we just, I think the simplest way to think about is blocks, you know, so you give a kid a blocks and they kind of play and they kind of stack things. But then there's times you're going to sit down on the floor and you're going to talk about the block, you're going to talk about the letter, you're going to talk about the colors on the block because you have an agenda. And that is also play, and it's really important. But both of those are really balanced. But I think people are very focused on guided play sometimes. They feel like, you know, they have to have an agenda, and you don't always have to. And you can take like everyday ordinary experiences and turn them in to a learning experience. It's also play.
I know as a parent that drive or push to have everything very structured and being in lessons and getting school done. And
Right.
then, as you mentioned, like cooking dinner. And then I think at the end of the day, I've not given my girls any time to play. So being intentional with it and
Right.
making time for it is important.
Right. It's just like any other activity you kind of play during the day. You should just kind of build in some little time. And it doesn't have to be, like it doesn't have to be get in the car and go to the park. It can be just walking outside, sitting down in the grass, or maybe just going to your teenager's room and sitting on the bed and, looking at stuff together or playing cards. Teenagers are always not super receptive to that. You give them a few minutes, they warm up, but a lot of times they're much more interaction. But those are really important to teaching them skills to be an adult. And again, that is a form of play,
And cultural preferences also come into play in this sort of thing, play on words, as well. How did those things really contribute to this?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of cultural things. People feel a lot of pressure to do like those things, like having that very intensive play where they're sitting and looking at cards, and especially like high economic people who are really wanting to push their kids into good schools and stuff like that. They feel a lot of pressure to do a lot of that. And yet, actually, what we know from research is they actually kind of prefer the relaxed play because they need that time. Whereas the reverse, a lot of people living in poverty, they need a little bit of both. They need a little bit of instruction. So they don't really, but they think that that's the way that they can help their child. So it can create a lot of stress. And culturally, I think you just kind of have to pick what's right for you and your family, and we all get unsolicited advice from others. And so then I think it's just kind of doing what's best for you and your kid. So,
and studies show that grandparents is also super important as well. Why?
This has been one of the greatest joys in life is grandparenting. I think when you have your children, you're very stressed about how you're going to pay for the house and how you're going to get them to school and how you're going to keep this kid alive. And then, you kind of go through all those experiences, and then you get to the life of being a grandparent where things are a little bit more settled. And really your role, if you're not, a lot of grandparents are actually involved in the primary care role, but if you can be really that supportive person who comes in and takes off of the parent and the mom to take the kids out or to get down on the floor or sit with them for a couple of hours. So it's a real gift to parents. And the other thing, it's really a gift to grandparents. I mean, they enjoy the time. Psychologically, it's really good for them. It helps with depression and anxiety, but it gets them very physically active. So, you're getting up and down off the floor, which it gets harder and harder, but it gets you outside and playing. But also grandparents need to recognize their limits. They don't need to be picking them up and throwing them around and stuff like that. But I think it's also for generations. It's a great time to kind of build that generational knowledge. You get to share things with your grandchildren, but also get to learn from them. So grandparents are such an important part. I think we lose that as we get older, and kind of acknowledging that it's okay for us to play too.
So what are the takeaways that you want healthcare providers and parents to know of the importance of play?
Yeah, I think the important thing is that it's not frivolous, that it's something that's very crucial to a child's development, but it has a lot of benefits for our health and for our mental health. I think the other thing too is there's a lot of, even if you're not an educator, or you're not in the area of childcare, sometimes that can be intimidating or stressful. There are so many resources now that are available online. If you just go and think like things to do with my kid or there's great apps where you can go and open daily and it will give you an activity to do with your kid. And it will also a lot of times tell you why it's important and what the brain research shows. So I think there's so many resources that are available to us. You don't have to be a PhD in child development to really promote good play. And even if you can't read or do those sort of things, there are activities you can do with a child to help them with their development.
Well, Dr. Rodgers, thank you so much for talking to me about something that seems silly, but at the same time, so beneficial in unique ways.
It's one of the best things of life.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for this episode of AFMC TV. Thanks for watching and have a great day.